Welcome to Journey of the Soul, Lesson 1. Tonight's class is called Demystifying Death, Perspective on Life and Beyond. In your student book, we are on page 1, of course, moving to page 2. And this evening, we are going to open up with a little exercise. You're all here, and that means something about this course sparked your interest. I don't know if it was the great trailer or if it was the topic. I want to hear, in your opinion, and please type it in the chat, exercise 1.1, what attracted you to this course? In other words, what sort of emotional, philosophical, just interest level, curiosity brought you to this course? Type it in the chat. I'd love to get a feel for it. And the reason we're doing this exercise is because if we're going to take this journey together, I want to try to address why you came. Of course, there's text, and of course, there's a way that we're going to do this, and I recognize that we're obviously going to try to stick to the script, but I want to be able to hear from you guys and try to address that. So type in the chat, what attracted you to this course? Why are you here this evening? Oh, Barbie, thank you. She says you. I appreciate that, but I'm looking for a little more. Contemplating life after death attracted me to the course. I personally think that the afterlife is going to be a pleasant situation since my life has been pleasant. Okay, so we have a couple of them that seem to be curiosity, whether people use other words or they actually use the word curiosity. Elise says, you want to be ready when you come there. So that's very personal. Okay, you want to be ready when that time comes. You mean the time that we all eventually will pass away, right? Learning about something nobody has come back from to share the experience. Wow, that's a great perspective. But again, why? Why, guys? Let's, because so far everything could just be curiosity. I'm curious what's going to be in the afterlife. Nobody else has told us. Okay, 5 reasons here, Danny. All right. What happens to life, force, or soul after death? Why? Why are you interested in that? How can we in Galut have a comprehension? Is presence of my dear. There we go. Okay, that's a very interesting one. You're interested in knowing whether we can actually have a relationship with the dear departed, or is that something we just say to make ourselves feel better? That's an interesting one. Very good. I like that. These are things we're going to address over the next 6 weeks. Number 4, I can't accept reincarnation. Oh, a lot of people have interest in reincarnation. Yes. What is the Jewish perspective on reincarnation? The entire lesson 5 is dedicated to reincarnation. We're going to talk about that a lot. In 30 years, don't put numbers, guys. In 30 years, I will probably be dead, so I might as well get ready. All right. Understanding the Jewish perspective, curiosity, education. The nature of the soul, that's good. Learning about the afterlife is a great way to learn about the nature of the soul. And Larry, I think where you're going with that is that helps us understand how we can interact with the soul now. If we understand what the soul is afterlife, then, all right. I want to be convinced, he says. Okay, I'm not sure about what. The idea of the world to come is a bit abstract and vague. He wants clarity. Where are we headed? You know, it's like your travel guide. That was one of the things we used in the marketing. We'll definitely be addressing that. Is reality beyond the body? Oh, very good. Very good. Elise, thank you. Is reality beyond the body and consciousness? A very, very important question. To a few people, this seems to be that, I won't mention who, but a few people, this seems to be directly related to a very specific loss that they felt just recently. They just recently lost a mother, a daughter, a son, that sort of thing. Okay. I want to learn about the afterlife. You partly, thank you. I really appreciate everyone who said they're here for me. I appreciate that. I hope that you'll also enjoy the learning that we have from the text. I always like to say, I view myself less as a teacher and more as a matchmaker. That my goal here is to connect you with the Torah, not to sort of get myself in the way and that people come for me. Although I appreciate the compliments. Thank you. People want to know the Jewish you. Curiosity it seems to be a big one. Okay. I want to dive into one particular thing, which is going to kind of guide a lot of what we talk about this evening. And give me a thumbs up if you can see the slide that just popped up. Okay, thank you. And that is something called thanatophobia. Thanatophobia. I did not know thanatophobia. I'm sorry. And that is an English word or a psychological term, which means the fear of death. We are on page 3 here.
Oh, yeah.
The fact of the matter is that, you know, nothing that we experience in our life compares to death. whenever we want to know about a particular thing and the way it tastes, we ask somebody, oh, this is a brand new, I've never tasted ice cream. Danny, what does ice cream taste like? And he'll describe it to me, well, it's sweet, it's similar to this, it's similar to that, etc. But the fact of the matter is that death is a very elusive thing. So that's one of the reasons why it's very elusive, because we don't have any other experience to compare it to. We can compare it to pain, but it doesn't really compare to pain. Pain is temporary, pain is not final. And we have this very strange relationship with death where we have no idea what's coming. And at the same time, we know that nobody comes back from there. So something about it, like, what gives? What is it all about? And I think that's why it's scary. And as human beings, we become very, very aware of everything around us. As human beings, one of the biggest blessings that we have is self-awareness, which means we get to see, there are many computers out there that can do a lot of the functions that human beings can do, usually faster, usually better than us, usually more efficiently, etc. Usually do more things at a time, etc. And yet, human beings remain unique to the fact that they are self-aware. Computers never think to themselves why, while they're thinking, they don't think, now I'm thinking. They certainly don't feel, and I'm not suggesting that self-awareness is the only difference between human beings and computers or machines, etc. But human beings have this thing called self-awareness, and while it's usually a tremendous virtue, it's also a tremendous vice, particularly when it comes to thinking about death. We are very much aware of our mortality. And so whether you're here tonight more from a philosophical perspective, a few people mentioned they want to know about the soul, they want to understand, they don't fully get it, which seems that they're more interested from a philosophical perspective. A few people mentioned whether they've recently been to funerals or recently lost loved ones, that there's an emotional reason why they're here tonight. And of course, the practical reason, right? Whether if you haven't lost someone yet, the chances of you losing a loved one at some point in the many years of your lifetime are probably 100%. And we want to know, how does that work? What is our relationship with them? What is going on here, right? What is really happening, like that we can actually work on the practical part of it. And that could be because you have specific questions, why do we say Kaddish? Why do we sit Shiva? Why do we have all these Jewish rituals? Or it could just be, trying to figure out how the relationship works. Okay, so that being said, we are going to open up a little bit by talking about this fear. If you think you're the only one, you're obviously not. But how far back does it go? Danny, can we ask you to read, please, for us? Text 1. Hold on. We can't hear. No, Danny, you're muted. I'm sorry.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, go ahead. Text 1. So this is from a professor whose name is Irvin Yalom. He is considered one of the global experts on the fear of death and this particular subject. Go ahead.
So mortality has haunted us. Is that what you're asking for?
Well, you're saying in terms of the correct answer to why we're here?
No. I'm asking you if that's the correct text to read.
Oh, a universal fear. Yes, mortality has haunted us. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mortality has haunted us from the beginning of history. 4,000 years ago, the Babylonian hero Gilgamesh reflected on the death of his friend Enkidu with the words, "Thou hast become dark and cannot hear me. When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu? Sorrow enters my heart, I'm afraid of death." Gilgamesh speaks for all of us. As he feared death, so do we all, each and every man, woman, and child. For some of us, the fear of death manifests only indirectly, either as generalized unrest or masqueraded as another psychological symptom. Other individuals experience an explicit, conscious stream of anxiety about death. And for some of us, the fear of death erupts into terror that negates all happiness and fulfillment.
Thank you, Danny. So to a certain degree, As you can see in figure 1.1, perhaps some of us more, perhaps some of us less. To a certain degree, we all have this fear of death. In fact, throughout our lives, we spend a lot of time working on safeties or mechanisms to deal with this fear and to repress it. You know, a couple decades ago, a group of social psychologists advanced a theory they call TMT, terror management theory, right? Literally terror. And by the way, this is very much related to what terrorists do. Because if you think about it, death is something that is constantly there. In other words, it's constantly there as a threat that we might die at any moment. And yet we usually don't spend that, hopefully, ideally in a healthy scenario, we don't spend that much time thinking about it on a day-to-day basis. You know, most of us, if we're psychologically healthy, we don't get into a car and think to ourselves, oh, I might get into a car accident. And what terrorists try to do is to bring that fear to the fore. So think, for instance, about 9/11. You know, the amount of people that died in 9/11 was minuscule compared to the amount of people that died from car accidents, right? And yet, for some reason, the terror that came from 9/11 was, you know, tremendous, and it overtook us. I remember this. I mean, I was a child, so I'm sure it affected me in a different way than it affected many of you. But and that's why we call them terrorists, because their goal is to bring that fear of death, that thanatophobia, and bring it to the fore and try to get us to be more conscious of it and to have it affect us in a way like that they can control us in a certain way. And that's why we spend a lot of our lives repressing it, right? And perhaps, if I may suggest, that a lot of those safeties perhaps recently have been failing many of us. Now, I don't know that this is why any of you came to the course, but I will certainly say that there are many people that the COVID-19 pandemic, which again, the likelihood of a person getting it, if you really do the math of how many people died and how many, and you know, and how likely you are, because one in whatever it is, how many people there are in the world and how many people died, the likelihood of you getting it and dying it are significantly low. And yet, because it's so to the fore, and because we're doing so much to repress it, et cetera, and rightfully so, this is something that's very much present in our minds. And as a result, you need only turn on the news to see that suicide rates are up. I think it was 180%. Certainly anxiety, mental health issues are up tremendously. And a lot of people are feeling, even people who were never anxious are feeling a little more anxiety. And certainly people who always struggled with anxiety, now it's coming to the fore. And so I think that is part of what informs us when we come to a class like this. We think to ourselves, you know, how can I grapple with death? It's such an elusive thing. It's such a final thing. It's something that I know so little about. How can I really try to understand it? And hopefully that will lead to me living a less anxious life. Hopefully that will lead to affecting my life in a real way, that when I think about death, it's not just, oh, I might die. There's actually understanding as to what will happen when I die. And as a result, I'm less afraid of it. And I realize that's a tall order. So it's like a big goal that we're setting for ourselves in this class. But I hope that over the course of the next hour or so, you will walk away powerfully affected and changed in this specific area. So let me just check to see if there's any, hold on. No, okay, just some greetings, people greeting each other, etc. Okay, just checking the chat. I'm trying to keep to my word. So if, you know, this class was billed as a class about the afterlife. And over the course of the next 6 weeks, we're going to try to talk about the afterlife. But if we want to understand death, if we want to understand the afterlife, we have to understand that word, life. What is it? What is life? When we think about life, we often throw it around. And I know this is such a cliche question, but when somebody asks us, I'm sorry, who are you? We often laugh it off kind of with like a, what do you mean, who am I? Of course I know who I am. And when we think about it, we perhaps don't really have where to put our finger on who exactly we are. And so if we're going to try to really understand what afterlife is, I think it's crucial that we understand what life is, who we are, and perhaps, you know, when we don't think about this on a daily basis, but every once in a while there's like a little crisis, you know. You think to yourself, what am I really doing here? What am I doing with my life? And am I the only one who has these things? I wake up in the morning, right, I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And perhaps having a more proper understanding of life will help us recognize what the afterlife is all I'll share with you a story. The Alter Rebbe, who was the first Chabad Rebbe. Hold on. Oops, we're jumping the gun here. I'm sorry. The Alter Rebbe, who was the founder of Chabad Hasidus, the founder of the Chabad movement, famously the author of the Tanya, etc. The Alter Rebbe had a grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, who he brought up. The Tzemach Tzedek was orphaned from his mother at a very young age, and the Alter Rebbe brought him up. And one day, I don't know if he was 3 years old, somewhere in that vicinity, the Tzemach Tzedek is sitting on the Alter Rebbe's lap, and he's playing, as Bina does with my beard, he's playing with the Alter Rebbe's beard. And he says, Zayda, Zayda, right? Zayda means grandfather. He says, Zayda, Zayda. And the Alter Rebbe looks at him and says, this is not Zayda, this is Zayda's beard. So the Tzemach Tzedek, the grandson thinks for a few seconds. He puts his hands on his grandfather's head and he says, Zayda, Zayda. And his grandfather says, that's not Zayda, that's Zayda's head. And this goes on, for a minute or two. That's not Zayda, that's Zayda's heart, that's Zayda's ears, Zayda's nose. Fine. Eventually, the Tzemach Tzedek, seemed to grow tired of the game. He crawls off the Alter Rebbe's lap and, walked off to go play on his own behind the door. And 10 seconds later, the Alter Rebbe hears a cry, like as if the child was hurt. Zayda, Zayda, Zayda. As the Alter Rebbe gets concerned, as every parent or grandparent does, and he runs over and he comes over to the Tzemach Tzedek and says, "What's wrong, my child?" He says, "There is Zayda." Very often, when we try to identify ourselves, perhaps we don't look at our limbs or our minds or our hearts and think that's who we are, but often subconsciously, that's what we do. We say to ourselves, who am I? I am my job. I am my career. I am perhaps, we define ourselves as a parent. We define ourselves as who we are mentally or emotionally. How often do people struggle with that? They let that, the whole psychology industry and the therapy industry is built off the fact that many people allow their minds and their hearts to control them, and they allow a certain emotion to define who they are. And yet when we strip it away, we recognize that none of this can really be us. This is my thought process. These are my emotions. These are my thoughts. So who am I really? From a Jewish perspective, all of these things are external. Laura Reitman, can you read for us, please? Text 2. Text 2 is Rabbi Chaim Vital, an ancient mystic, who writes as follows. Go ahead.
The wise are aware that the human body is not the human being. When we speak of the human being, we are referring to the human's inner dimension. The body is merely a garment in which the soul is attired during its sojourn in this world.
Thank you, Laura. Mystical words, if I ever heard them. So we are not the body. Our bodies don't define us. We are our soul. Raise your hand if you feel like you have a proper grasp on what the soul is. Okay, good that nobody's pompous enough to raise their hands, because I would have challenged you. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't challenge you. Again, words, and we want to try not to just focus on the words, but actually to internalize this idea. One of the treats that you're in for over the next 6 weeks is that each lesson is also accompanied by a video meditation that at some point during the class we will do. We're going to do one right now, and hopefully by the end of it you'll have a little bit of a clarity with regards to what we mean when we say that we are not our bodies, rather we are our souls. Hold on just a second. I'm going to share this again because we didn't have the sound. Okay, so if you want to close your eyes, feel free to. If that's not your speed, no problem. But please follow along with Rabbi Shais Taub, a world-renowned specialist.
Hi, this is Rabbi Shais Taub. Welcome to a series of meditations for the course Journey of the Soul. The purpose of these meditations is going to be internalizing some of the deeper ideas that are a little bit difficult to grasp. And generally, we will try to do so by way of visualization, trying to picture symbols that represent some of the ideas and that we can focus on briefly so that we can begin to connect on a deeper level to these ideas. To begin with, the entire notion of life is a challenging concept because it is so intangible. We're used to relating to things, to that which we can see, to that which we can touch. And life is completely intangible. How do we begin to relate to that which is unseeable, untouchable? How do we envision, how do we see the unseeable? So if you will, I'll ask you to begin right now, however you're most comfortable doing so. Close your eyes, keep your eyes open. Envision a musical instrument, a physical object, let's say a piano, made of wood and wires, something you can look at with your physical eyes, you can touch it with your physical hands. It's a physical object. Now, the piano is merely a thing. A person comes over to the piano, the pianist sits down and begins playing a beautiful song. Now, this song stirs your soul. Try to hear it. Hear the music. Where is the song? Can you see it? Can you touch it? You can see and touch the piano. You can't see or touch the song. And now the song is over and the piano is standing there. If you'll open up the piano, will you find the song? Think now how everything in the world is matter and energy. The matter is the physical object that we see, the piano. The energy is the intangible, the song. We'll take a half a minute now to try to think of ourselves in these terms. Think of your body as the instrument, the physical object that can be seen, that can be touched. And think of the life you live as the song that is being played through the instrument. We'll take half a minute right now to see and hear the piano and the song, the body and the soul.
The purpose of this exercise or this meditation is not just to remove ourselves from our bodily experience, but to try to understand, if we are not our bodies, who are we? And that's where that elusive word, the word soul, comes into play. The word soul is often thrown around like some other words that we know of. Take the word relativity, for instance, the theory of relativity, electricity, the Big Bang theory. Many of you are nodding as I'm saying these words, and I'm not going to challenge you on that, but certainly a large percentage of the population throws these words around. And of course, we're a theory of relativity. Yeah, Einstein. Yeah, of course. Yeah, the train, whatever, you know. Yet when we're asked to really define it and understand it, if you're not a professor or a scientist who specializes in this field, it's probably quite difficult. I think soul is another word like that. We throw it around a lot. We understand it's there. Maybe after a meditation like that, we're even more in tune to its existence. We recognize that might be who we really are. As figure 1.2 suggests, who am I? The real me is my soul, not my body. We get that. But what is the soul? I encourage you to take now 30 seconds to try to answer the question on page 6. Think of an analogy. If you want, you can type it in the chat. If not, jot it down, hold it for the future. We're gonna come back to this. Think of an analogy to depict the body-soul relationship. Write it down. I'll give about 30 seconds for us to do this, and then we'll keep going. If you feel like sharing it, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to share it.
Neshama.
Neshama is a word. That's not an analogy. We're looking for an analogy. Sheila, thank you. A candle and a flame. I like that.
Okay, I see what you're talking about.
I don't know that a candle, Sheila, I don't know that a candle and a flame is the best for a body and soul. It's great. It's a good example, but I don't know. The flame and the candle are two separate things.
Fire and heat.
Fire and heat is a good one. Thank you. Deeds versus words.
The light bulb and the energy that illumines it.
Okay. The electricity, in other words, and the light bulb. What you're saying?
Yes, because the light bulb is like the container and the energy is the electricity.
Right. Here's another one. Guys, we're not just looking for examples of containers and things that are contained within the containers, but also something that gives life to the other, right? One thing that gives life to the other thing. Radio is a body and the transmission is the soul. I like that. Maybe the radio is only a conduit for it. Let's keep all these analogies here for a minute. From a Jewish perspective, if we're going to try to understand what the soul is, we got to go back to the beginning. So please turn to you're all on page 6. But on page 6, we have two texts. Text 3a, text 3b. These two texts come from Genesis. I'll read them for you. And they describe, respectively, the creation of man and the creation of animals. Okay? And the exercise here is, while I'm reading these, you can feel free to follow along with me. Try to identify the difference. Type it in the chat if you catch something between the creation of man, creation of a human being, and the creation of an animal. Because, of course, animals, although they have souls to a certain degree, but they don't have the same type of soul as human beings do. So text 3a is, Vayitzer Hashem Elokim, God formed the human of soil from the earth. We're all familiar with this verse from Genesis. And breathed into his nostrils and the neshama, soul of life, and the human being became a living being. Text 3b describes the creation of animals. Vayomer Elokim totze haaretz nefesh chaya. God said, let the earth bring forth living beings of differing species, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their species, and it was so. Anybody identify a difference? Any differences you can see between the two?
The neshama is missing from the animal.
The animal obviously has some sort of soul. It's obviously alive, right? So what is the difference?
The neshama is the divine soul.
Now you're mixing in Tanya. Let's not start to talk about the divine soul, the animal soul. That's going to complicate things. I know that some people.
Okay, got it.
But let's leave that aside. We're talking about the soul that animates the body. Go again.
God breathed into man's nostrils.
Okay.
There's nothing saying that God did anything to the animals.
All right, we're almost there. Very close. Larry, you want to share something?
Yeah, well, the animal is more instinctual. It needs food to stay alive. And
whoa, wait. You're giving me things you know about animals now. I'm asking the difference between these two texts. Mickey, go ahead.
I would say in the earth bring forth living beings, it's matter, created matter giving forth to other created matter, versus Hashem breathing life into matter.
I think you're getting a little too nuanced in the text. In other words, both of them, God created it. That's clear. It starts over either God formed the human or God said, and both of them are created from the earth. In other words, the animals come forth from the earth, and the human being is created from dirt, right? From mud. Go ahead, Joanne.
Well, following up on what Marilyn said, God breathed into man. It's like he gave a part of himself into man. His breath is like a part of God in a way. It doesn't say he did that to the animals.
Absolutely.
I think I know what it is.
Okay, go ahead, Marilyn. No, by the way, there's no
human being became a living being. So what was the human being before it was a living being?
Okay, so here together between everybody's answers, I think we're starting to get a little bit of a picture here. I think one of the crucial points that they're trying to call to our attention here is that the animal was created with a soul. The animal came out of the ground, started walking around, eating, drinking, sleeping, doing whatever it does, all the things that Larry mentioned, right? The instinctual things that it does. The human being was created matter, and then the soul to animate that matter was taken from somewhere else. Joanna suggesting it comes from God himself. I see some Tanya coming forward again. But that soul came from somewhere else and was breathed into the body. In other words, there's two separate items here that are being married together. Not that they were both created together as one entity and then started to roam the earth. The Chizkuni puts it this way. Barbie, can I ask you to read for us, please? Text 3c. Just don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay, what page?
Page 7, text 3c.
Okay. Okay, God did what he had done with any other creature. He blew into Adam with his Holy Spirit, a neshama that is immortal and does not perish when the body does.
So the Chizkuni is suggesting that if our soul preceded us, then it is not mortal like the body is. The body was created at a certain point. We have to figure out where the soul comes from. And if it comes from before the body, then the body expiring doesn't mean that the soul expires. So where are we? So far, we've recognized that who am I? I am not my body. I'm not my knowledge, my intellect, my emotions, or my desires. I am my soul. But now we've essentially reached a stage 2. By analyzing these 2 verses, we've recognized that the soul preceded the body and was inserted into the body, as opposed to, as it was by animals, the life force or the soul for the animal being created together with the animal itself. And this leads us to a little bit of a deeper understanding of who the real I is. Sure, the real I is our soul. We're starting to get a little bit of a picture. We'll still flesh it out. But one thing that's crucial that seems to come out of the Torah is that the soul is eternal. And if the true I is the soul, then the true I is eternal. Everybody with me so far?
Yeah, it's sort of complicated.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't promise the course was going to be easy. That's one thing you won't find in any of my emails.
Well, there's a leap of faith to understand, the concept of neshama and the concept of a God breathing the soul into each and every individual. I like it.
So one second. By a leap of faith, you mean because you're trusting the Torah. In other words, because in the Torah it's clear.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a very good question, actually. And if you don't mind my expounding on the question, I guess the general question is the Torah true? What tells us this is all true? Maybe the whole Torah was just given to us to make us feel better, etc.
No.
So I don't know if there is a really short answer to this. And it really could be a whole separate course. Not only can it be, but it is. I gave a course last spring in May of last year called Judaism Decoded, which specifically addressed this point about whether the Torah is true, why we trust the Torah. Specifically, we spoke about the oral Torah, because I think a lot of people have an easier time getting on board with the fact that the written Torah comes from God, but the oral Torah they're not so on board with. They're trying to figure out where that comes from. It's a full course. I'm actually happy to share the recordings with you. If I remember, I'll put it in the follow-up email as a reference, YouTube recordings, but it's another 6-week course that each week an hour and a half. So I don't know if we have time for that specifically here. But at least if we're going based on the Torah's accounting, one thing becomes very clear to us from the Torah, Barbie, can we agree on that? That the soul is eternal because it preceded the body. It comes from beforehand. And that's what we're trying, I think that's the point we're trying to make here. That makes sense?
Okay. Makes sense.
Okay, we're at a little break here. Are there any other questions? If anybody else wants to chime in here, if not, we'll keep going. Yes, Danny, go ahead. You got it. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I asked. I mean, the text is clear, and you've explained the continuity of the soul with God breathing into Adam. but the rest of us didn't benefit from that, obviously. So there's the analogy. You've drawn a nice metaphor for Adam, but it's not so obvious for the rest of us.
Perfect. My favorite kind of question, the one that segues right into the next section. On page 8, we're going to take this now, because obviously if you didn't understand Danny's question, he says this is all about Adam, the first man that was created. And I guess we can make a jump or an extrapolation that that's the same thing at some point with us. But where can we find a Torah accounting about the way that human beings were created? Okay, so let's go to the Medrash. This is a fascinating Medrash. It's one of my favorites. And if anybody attended when we spoke about, I think it was also called Journey of the Soul, actually. It was a one-time class that we did around the fire when we were doing that, the Musician's Muse. Amazing class we did. Anyways, without plugging my own classes, let's start by reading text 4, which is the Medrash, talking about the soul before it comes down into the body, and then how it then, in turn, enters the body. Carol, are you comfortable reading for us? Text 4 on page 8. Soul
40 days before the conception of a child, God summons the angel in charge of souls and tells him, "Bring before me a certain soul that is now in paradise. Its name is such and such, and its appearance is such and such. This is possible because all the souls that are born in this world were created on the day the world was created and exist until the end of time."
Okay. We got a little more here, so I guess you got to turn the page.
Okay. The angel goes and brings the soul before God. The soul bows and prostrates itself before the Supreme King of Kings. God instructs the soul, "Please enter the seminal drop that is currently in the hands of the angel in charge of pregnancy." The soul protests, "Master of the universe, I am quite satisfied with the world I inhabited since the day you created me. I am holy and pure, hewn from your throne of glory. Why do you wish to cause me to enter this putrid drop?"
So there's a little resistance. It seems so simple down here. Man and woman get married, they do their thing, and a body comes popping out 9 months later. But it turns out there's a lot more that's going on for that body to be animated. The soul finds itself in a blissful, beautiful situation or scenario or what have you, a hangout area, and then it comes down here, and it's kind of being forced to come down here. And in fact, we find this attitude with regards to how we should approach our lives throughout. I mean, we'll quote here from Pirkei Avot. Esther, can you read for us, please? Text 5 on page 10. This is a quote. Don't forget to unmute yourself. This is a quote about how we should, what the neshama's approach is to the world here while we live here. Go ahead.
Okay.
Esther, please go ahead.
This world is like a corridor before the world to come. Prepare yourself in the corridor so that you may enter the palace. A single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world.
So it turns out that this heaven, or what have you, and by the way, there will be a full class on heaven and hell, and we'll touch on that. But for now, let's just call it heaven. Again, one of those words we throw around. But wherever the soul is, pre coming down into the body, and like I said, if we're going to try to understand post lifetime or whatever or what have you, we have to understand pre-lifetime. So wherever it is, pre-lifetime, post-lifetime, this other place, the soul seems to be in a very blissful state. And if you don't mind my asking, these texts seem to be very anti this physical world, anti-life, almost as if this life is like a bad side effect, like who wants to be down there in that world? I mean, look at this. The rabbis are encouraging us here to look at life in this world as a very brief temporary stage. The example given is a hallway, a corridor, right? And this is not really the palace. There's this major palace at the end. Maybe there was a palace at one end and a palace at the other end, if I can extrapolate here. And we're just in this little corridor now, right? I don't know how many of you that are your home set up the same way mine is, but between my bedroom and my children's bedroom, there's a little tiny hallway. We don't have any furniture there. There's nothing there. We got nothing. I mean, it's not a place you decorate. It's not a place you spend or hang out, spend time, etc. Unless we're having guests over, like my parents will come over and they'll stay in that room. So then maybe, the children will sleep either on the floor in our room or in the floor outside our room, or whatever it is, but we don't usually use the hallway, right? So the attitude here seems to be very almost anti-life. Absolutely, Esther, that's a great thing to share now. Yes, that is absolutely true. One of the reasons why a baby cries, that we're told according to the Jewish perspective, one of the reasons why a baby cries right when it comes into this world is because the soul is essentially crying through the body, because that's what happens once they're born. It's the soul and a body, and the soul is crying because it has now entered this world. 100%. So where are we now? On page 10, figure 1.4. Step 1 is that the real me is my body, not my soul. Okay, got that. Step 2, the real me, the soul, is eternal. So I am eternal. Fair enough. I'm glad getting on board with that. But number 3, the real eternal me is unaffected by birth or death at either end of the spectrum. That seems to be a little bit harder to get on board with. If that's the case, you would think that Judaism would be a culture that would be very anti-life. Don't spend very, I forget the word, asceticism, right? Very into removing ourselves from the world and not being involved in anything in the physical world, because that seems to be what this is implying, at least, right? Yet many of you are shaking your head, I see that, as I'm talking, because you can't get on board with that. You're familiar with the fact that Judaism places a very strong emphasis on life. Let's start by seeing this emphasis on life that Judaism places, first in the practical, and then we'll talk in the theoretical. So starting in the practical, Shlomo, can you read for us, please, text 6? Shlomo Cross, you here?
I am here.
Go ahead, text 6, page 12.
Okay. Page 12, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so if a non-Jew attempts to force a Jew to violate one of the Torah's commandments at the pain of death, the Jew should violate the commandment rather than be killed, because the Torah states concerning the mitzvot, a person shall do them and live by them. One should live by them and not die by them.
Thank you. So this is from Jewish law, Maimonides, of course, one of the foremost, Jewish codifiers of Jewish law. And Maimonides shares as follows. He says, what if, and he gives the example of a non-Jew, because presumably a Jew wants us to keep Torah mitzvah. What if a non-Jew holds a gun to your head? He says, either you eat this pork or I'm gonna shoot you dead, right? So says Maimonides, we have a clear verse in the Torah that tells us that we should live by the commandments, we should live by the mitzvot while we do the mitzvot and not die by them. In other words, we are commanded, in a situation of life and death, and by the way, this extends, if something will save someone's life, so let's say desecrating Shabbat, right, in order to save someone's life, let's say getting in a car to drive on Shabbat to take someone to the hospital. Let's say lighting a fire because someone is really cold and they're also sick and this can kill them from pneumonia or whatever it is. Any of these things on Shabbat or any other prohibition that we have in the Torah, we are commanded to do this thing, save this life, because life in Judaism trumps everything. Some of you may be familiar with the exception of 3 things. There are 3 things that we are commanded to give up our life for. They are the oneness of Hashem, which means serving idols or denying the existence of Hashem. I was going to say adultery, but it's really all prohibited marriages or prohibited sexual relations. And the third one is murder, of course. Right? If someone tells you, kill this person, otherwise I'll kill you, you don't kill him and you die instead. But with the exception of those 3, which means there's 610 other mitzvot, we give up our lives for it. If that's not a culture of life, I don't know what is. So how can we say that Judaism, starting from the text all about, how the soul comes down here, down to the advice that the Talmud in Pirkei Avot gives us, Ethics of Our Fathers gives us, as to how we should approach what our attitude to life should be. How can we say that we should treat it just as a temporary, non-desirable existence? So right about now is when I need to come clean. On page 8 and page 10, you may have noticed that in the texts, possibly not, even in the English, not just in the Hebrew, there are 3 dots. And that's because in order to illustrate the point, we brought you half of those texts. And now it's time to give you the other half. So first of all, text 7 is the conclusion of text 4, where we were talking about the journey of the soul. And Joel, can I ask you to read text 7 for us, please? You with us, Joel? No, you have to unmute yourself. Sorry. Do you know how to do that? Go ahead.
Descending.
God hurries. I'm sorry, there seems to be some trouble with this connection. Okay. I'm just going in order of who I have here. Larry, can you please read for us text 7?
Yeah, that's God hurries to reassure the descending soul. The world to which I'm bringing you will prove more beneficial than the one you presently inhabit. Indeed, I formed you exclusively for the purpose of creating mortal life from this particular drop of seed. With that, God forcibly installs the soul.
All right. So Hashem installs the soul inside the body and says, I did this for a purpose. Not only am I going to do this, even though you're begging and kicking and screaming that I shouldn't do it, but I'm not only am I going to do it, I'm going to tell you that this is going to be very beneficial for you. And text 8, which is the conclusion, Esther Necha, if you can please read for us, just unmute yourself, please. This is the conclusion of Ethics of Our Fathers, which is teaching us what our approach to life should be in this world. We have the flip side.
A single moment of repentance and of good deeds in this world is greater than all in the world to come.
So Judaism values life quite a bit. And Judaism values the world quite a bit, right? In other words, and everything that goes on in this world. So how do we reconcile the beginnings and ends of those, the beginnings and endings of those 2 texts that we just brought, right? And this is summarized nowhere better. I'm sorry, no, this is going to be a different point. So how do we summarize these 2? So I think the key difference, and I'll call your attention to it right now, I think the key difference lies in understanding the difference between important or pleasurable. Let's go back to that text about how we should approach this world in this world. So the first part was text 5, right? A single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world. The world to come is more blissful, more enjoyable. This spiritual realm where the soul was before it came into the body and where it's going to go after it leaves the body is definitely more pleasurable, more enjoyable, more blissful. But look at text, what number is it? Sorry, I'm getting confused with my numbers. But if you go back to text 8, which is the end of it, a single moment of repentance and good deeds in this world is greater or more important, right? That was the purpose, as Hashem tells the soul, even though it might not be as pleasurable as the world to come or as this spiritual realm, it's more important and plays a more critical role in everything that's going on. In fact, this ends up really being the universe's purpose. If we look back at when the world is created, the Talmud has a very interesting statement about a condition that God makes when he creates the world. Mickey, can we ask you to read, please? Text 9. And where we're going here is we're making this, instead of just being the micro, don't forget to unmute yourself. Instead of just making this about the micro, it's also about the macro, which means it's not just about the soul's mission in this world. It's about the global mission of the entire world. Go ahead, Mickey.
Okay. God created the universe on a condition. If the Jews accept the Torah, he told the universe, you will continue to exist. If they do not, I will return you to nothingness. Really?
If the Jewish people don't accept the Torah, which, mind you, according to Jewish counting, occurred in the year 2248. Says God, if the Jewish people don't accept the Torah, and there's no giving of the Torah, and the Jewish people don't do all these mitzvahs, I'm returning the whole world to nothingness. The whole thing was pointless. I don't get it. What about the 2,248 years beforehand? What about all the spiritual realms that precede the physical realms? What about everything everything is worth nothing just because one nation didn't accept one particular Torah? The answer is yes. And that's particularly what this text is trying to drive home. By way of analogy, consider this. Imagine you have a guy, dates a girl, I don't know, dates a girl 2 or 3 years, gets to know her, proposes, they set a wedding date. You guys know in the Hasidic world, in the Orthodox world, we get married a month or two later. But this guy says, you know what? In a year from now, we're setting a wedding date. And over the course of this year, I don't know why. I don't know why the secular world insists on prolonging the agony of arranging a wedding. But either way, this guy is busy. He rents a hall. He hires a caterer. He gets flowers. He gets entertainers. He gets some musicians. He gets things. He sets up a beautiful, beautiful shebang. And the night before the wedding, right, when he's got all this whole party planned out, the girl backs out. I don't know what happened. They get into a fight. She chickens out. Whatever it is, she leaves him at the altar. Not literally, but leaves him at the chuppah or whatever. What place, what purpose does this band that he maybe worked and flew down from Israel during COVID to try to get them to come and to get a visa, to get here, to be here in the US at his wedding, because this is specifically the band that he and his wife to be, right? That they liked or whatever. What purpose does this band play in his life now? What purpose do all these flowers and the entertainers and the hall and all these beautiful things, what purpose do they play? The truth is absolutely nothing. And this is what the Talmud is sharing with us. Right? And so imagine if the caterer will come to the next morning and say, excuse me, I know the wedding is off. You told me that, but should we still bring the food? Should people still eat? Of course not. The whole purpose of this was to celebrate and to bring about that the wedding should be proper. But if the bride is not here and the wedding is not happening, I don't need all the rest of this. Similarly, Hashem says that was the whole purpose of creation. I created the world in order that the Torah should be able to come down into this world, that this nation of the Jewish people should do the mitzvot, and they should bring light into the world, and they should uplift the world and elevate the world. If that's not going to happen, the whole game is off. And that, my friends, can only be accomplished here in this physical world. Because the mitzvot cannot be accomplished on a spiritual level. That can only be accomplished in this physical world. And this explains a little bit of the conflict of feelings that the soul has, or really that life itself is. Yocheved, can you read for us? We can't hear you. I don't know why. You're not unmuted. No, I don't know what it is. I don't know. For some reason, we can't seem to hear you. Marilyn, can you read for us, please? Text 10. It's a little schizophrenia. Don't forget to unmute yourself, Marilyn. It's a little schizophrenia that the Pirkei Avot, again, quoting this Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers, tells us about how the soul feels, or how we feel as human beings. Go ahead.
Against your will, you are formed, and against your will, you are born. Against your will, you live, and against your will, you die.
So I don't get it. Against my will, I was born. All right, we explained that. The soul comes into the body. The soul doesn't want to come into the body. It was in a heavenly sphere. No problem. Against my will, I die. So do I like this world or I don't like this world? This is the dichotomy that we're talking about. God created the world specifically because he wanted this dichotomy. He wanted there to be mortals surviving in a material habitat, in a very physical, hangout, while striving to lead sacred, ethical lives. They should come here. Those temptations should exist. The challenges should exist. In the spiritual realms that precede this world, there is no conflict. There's no challenge. Nobody there is saying, well, maybe you shouldn't study Torah right now. Maybe you should go watch TV. No. And yet every single one of us is sitting here, and hopefully I'm being dynamic enough that you haven't wanted to go watch TV, but we have it in us that we do want to go do something else. We don't necessarily always want to learn Torah. Sometimes we want to do something else. Right? Otherwise, we'd be doing it all day. But this is specifically what God wanted us. He wanted us to live in this world and keep his Torah. So it's hard for the soul to come down here because it was in this heavenly blissful state, but it's also hard for the soul to leave this world. Why? Because this is where the action is. Talk about FOMO, huh? It's going to leave this world and it'll go to the next world and it won't be able to do a mitzvah. So where are we? On page 15, figure 1.5. Number one is we figured out that death is not the end. But number two is that while death is not the end, death does place a certain ending to the life that we have here where we can do physical mitzvot. And that's why Judaism places such an emphasis on life and why we'll do anything to preserve a life. Why? Because the next world is more pleasurable, but this world is more important. This world is all where it's at. It's all about it. This is what the whole world was created for. And here's a very powerful story on page 16, text 11, about the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Chabad Rebbe. Looking for someone who didn't read yet. Hold on. Beth, are you up to reading? I don't know if she's there. I guess not. So Steve, we'll ask you to read this one, please. I know you're always there because you don't have a camera. But the previous Chabad Rebbe, let me just set this up for a moment. He really, so what we've been describing till now is thanatophobia resolved, how you deal with it. The real way to rise above death is to recognize that, of course, death serves as an ending to something that, something amazing, something very important, doing mitzvahs, being physically good in this world, which you can't be in the next world. There is no conflict, there is no challenge to get over. But it's not something that we fear because the soul doesn't die. Our life is not over. Lifetime is over. This physical existence is over. But we just revert back to our spiritual existence, which preceded our current life and succeeds our current life. As I mentioned, the previous Rebbe really exemplified this point. The previous Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, a Russian Jew, and a Jew who defied the KGB at every level. I see some people who are familiar with his story smiling because he's really a Jewish hero if you look into his story. And this excerpt, text 11, Steve, which you read for us now, is such an amazing. Meaning he really helped to keep Judaism alive, much to the exasperation of the KGB and the communists and the former Soviet Union. And at one point, they even had him arrested, without getting into the whole story about how he had the death penalty on his head, etc. But this is a particular excerpt from his interrogation, from his personal diary. Go ahead.
I arrived for interrogation at the offices of the Soviet GPU. However, in keeping with my principles, I was not very cooperative. One of the interrogators raised a revolver that sat on the desk before him. He looked me in the eye and mockingly said, "This small toy has incredible powers. It causes principles to melt away. It opens mouths. Under its spell, even mutes have become talkative." I responded, "You're quite mistaken. That toy only has an effect on the faint-hearted non-believers, those who with one world and multiple gods. We, on the other hand, have one God in two worlds. As such, I don't panic at the sight of your toy. It has no effect on me whatsoever." I always love this story.
You've seen it before.
Oh, yeah.
What the Rebbe is describing, he's not just saying, I am greater than death. I don't fear death because I have two worlds. What he's describing is this world, the physical world that you're threatening to take away from me, that never really played a part of my life anyway. Even while I was in this physical world, I was all about the spiritual. You're talking here about a Rebbe, a tzaddik, who certainly exemplified all of these ideals that we strive for, right? So even while the Frierdiker Rebbe lived in this world, he lived above this world. He says, that's why I don't fear death. Death is just means that the physical part will be taken away and I'll move on. This approach really allows a Jew, if we can internalize this approach, to live wholeheartedly. Why? Because we recognize the importance of life. We recognize how powerful and how effective life is and what it's all about. But we recognize that when it ends, it's not over. We just revert back to our spiritual self, which, to be honest, our life should be more spiritual anyhow. One more rabbi and his approach to this dichotomy, if I may. Elise Iser, if you can, please. Text 12, we learn about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, or the author, I should say the compiler of the Mishnah, and his approach to death as he's literally staring it in the face. He's lying on his deathbed. Go ahead.
Okay, when Rabbi Judah the Prince fell ill and lay on his deathbed, Rabbi Chia entered and found him weeping. My master, exclaimed Rabbi Chia, why do you weep? Was it not taught if one dies smiling, it is a good sign for him, while weeping is a bad sign for him? Rabbi Judah replied, I weep because of my inability to study the Torah and observe the commandments after death.
So, thank you, Elise. This is a very interesting back and forth, a very interesting dialogue we have here. The students of Rebbe are asking Rebbe a very interesting question. And it's no wonder that they need to back it up by Talmudic wisdom. They walk into the room where a man is about to die and ask him, why are you crying? Are you kidding me? Imagine a scenario. Imagine walking into a room, and I'm sure many of you have been in such rooms, where somebody is dying, literally on their deathbed, and asking them, why are you crying? What do you mean, why am I crying? My life's about to end, right? But they back it up with a very interesting piece of wisdom that says if a person dies smiling, it's a good sign for him, but weeping is a bad sign for him. What do you think drives this point? What drives this point is that his students are saying to him, Rebbe, don't you remember? You always taught us that life was eternal. Life is all about the soul. It's not about the body. So don't worry about it. What are you crying about? And Rebbe's response is even more poignant. What does he say? He says, I'm not crying because my life is going to end. I'm not afraid of this physical body going down into the grave and my soul. No, I'm not afraid of that. My soul lives on. I was all about my soul anyways. I'm crying about one simple thing. In English, in 2021, we would call it FOMO. FOMO. Anybody ever heard this phrase? Fear of missing out. He says, I'm afraid I'm going to move on to the next world, he says. It's going to be blissful. It's going to be beautiful. I'm not worried about the pain of dying. I'm not worried about the lack of I'm not worried about the fear of the unknown or anything like that. I'm worried about a simple thing. I want to be able to do mitzvahs, and now that's going to be taken away from me. That mission, that being part of the whole reason the world was created is now being taken away from me. And I'm moving on to the next world. One more analogy, and we'll let this lie. The only reason I'm spending so much time on this, and this may cause us to go a little over time, is because I think this is the crux of the lesson right here. Many of you have been to retirement homes. Not living there, but you've been to visit people, you've seen, right? Maybe you've even been to a luxurious retirement home, tennis courts, beautiful dining halls, multiple dining halls. You're in the mood of Thai food, here's Thai food. You're in the mood of Delhi food, here's Delhi food. Whatever it is, right? They serve you, they're there at your beck and call. Everything is beautiful. It's beautiful, right? For those of you here on the Zoom, most of you are working people. This should sound like bliss. Are you kidding me? I get to watch movies and play tennis, hang out with my loved ones a whole day, a whole night. I don't have to worry about a single thing. All I do is just kick back and relax. Seems like an amazing lifestyle to me, right? So why is the whole world not running to retirement homes? For a very simple reason. Retirement homes are not considered amazing places. It's the best people can do under the circumstances. But when you enter a retirement home, you have essentially given up your control on your life. You no longer play an active role in this world. You cannot take care of yourself. You're letting go of all independence, and you're relinquishing yourself. You're submitting yourself to a complete dependence on the staff at the retirement center. So while it might be very blissful and very beautiful, you don't feel as important. You don't feel as if you're actually part of what's going on here. And I think that's a very important point. That's exactly the point of what happens when a person leaves this physical world, so to speak. Their body passes on, and then their soul moves on to the next world. That's what's going on. And this leads us to a very important question. The Talmud, and this is going to be text 13, has a very interesting saying, a very cryptic saying about tzaddikim. You know what, actually, before we move into this, for those of you that are not with us, we're on page 18. We're about to start the section called Defining Life. Before we get into it, let me just pause to take some questions. I see some of them typed in the chat, but let me start off by taking, if anybody has some questions, please feel free. Now's a great time. Raise your hand, unmute yourself. Anybody? Okay, so we'll take some. Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
The mourner's Kaddish. In this, it doesn't bemoan life, right? It's kind of a celebration of life. Am I right?
Absolutely. The only reason I'm not gonna,
Kaddish.
absolutely, but the only reason I'm not going to elaborate on what you're mentioning.
All of a sudden, my screen's broke.
Sorry. The only reason I'm not going to elaborate on what you're talking about is because that's part of the topic of a future lesson.
Okay.
We're going to talk about Kaddish.
It's just an idea.
100%, and it's a good idea.
Okay.
For now, we're just talking about it on a general level and kind of the theoretical, so to speak, before we get to the practical. Anybody else? Any other questions? Danny, I see you typed one. You want to just ask it? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's why are we denied the remembrance or the awareness of the previous world and the future world, which could be more motivating to contribute in the present world for more people, if we could have a better awareness of the broader context.
So I will start off by challenging your assumption, which is your assumption is that we don't remember our current life in the future world. I know that's a big question on a lot of people's minds. Do we carry our consciousness with us? What do we take with us to the next world? And we're going to talk about that next week.
No, the opposite.
One second. So no, but I started off by, you mentioned both ends. So I'm going to start off with that end. And the actual truth is that we do retain a certain amount of our consciousness, and we're going to talk about that next week. But to your point about pre-life, okay, so there's a lot to say about this. Let me say briefly as follows. Imagine if you did have a very clear memory of looking at the world from a bird's eye view and understanding the implication of every action and recognizing what happens when you do a mitzvah and what happens when you do the opposite. Hopefully, that would make it very, very easy to follow Hashem's will and take away the entire challenge. I think it would kind of defeat the purpose. That being said, we do have a little bit of memory. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of this medrash, which talks about how before a soul comes down into the body, that the soul, while it's inside the embryo, in other words, in the what do they call it, in utero, there's a malach, there's an angel that teaches the neshama or the pre-born baby, fetus is the word I was looking for the entire time, the entire Torah, and then before it exits the womb, he taps it on the lips. Some people say that's even where the indent comes from, and it forgets the entire Torah. Raise your hand. Anybody ever heard this medrash before? Okay. Here's a question. What's the point of that? Why would you teach me the entire Torah only so that I forget it? If I'm going to forget it anyways, what's the purpose of it? So the answer is that we don't entirely forget it, and it is there subconsciously, and it's kind of God's way of giving us the full guidebook for life before we come into life. Of course, we can't fully consciously remember that, otherwise it would take away the whole challenge. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Steve says yes. Danny's shaking his head. Go ahead. You know what, Danny, let's leave it for now because I see there's a few other people with questions and I really want to move on. Steve, did you have a question or you were just chiming in there?
I was just chiming.
All right, good.
But I believe in reincarnation. My ex-wife was a good example.
We're getting to reincarnation, lesson 5. I promise we're going to do a full lesson we're going to dedicate to it. It's one of the exciting things everybody wants to know about. Okay. So for now, let's dive back into it. Okay. So where are we now? Page 18, text 13, defining life. This is an interesting statement. The Talmud tells us, and I'll read this one. The Talmud tells us that that after their demise, tzaddikim, which means righteous people, are referred to as being alive. Here's my question for you. What do you think the Talmud means? Type this in the chat, please. What do you think the Talmud means when it says alive? Right? It's after they died. It's saying so, right? They've demised. They've gone on from this world, but yet they're still alive. What do you think that word alive means? Anybody in the chat? Come on. I'll give it 30 seconds. Carolyn, people's memory. Interesting. Okay. I guess my question to you, Carol, would be if you say that when we say they're alive, you mean in people's memory. they are part of the living, their good deeds remain. All these things seem to be implying their legacy. Shouldn't that be not just righteous people, but also regular people? Like, what about me? I'm also alive afterwards. Same question for those that are saying the soul. I see a few people saying soul.
Okay, tzaddik people, they would encourage you to also do good.
Oh, absolutely. They're good and they encourage other people to be good. That's fine. But what if our description here of them still being alive is like a few people said, fully aware, their soul lives on in people's memory, all these things so far are things that we've discussed today, by the way. And all of those things seem to apply to every single person. Why are we saying specifically tzaddikim? Why are we saying that this specifically applies to righteous people? So a couple of you are touching on it, and that is that they are aligned with Hashem completely. Thank you, Laura. I love that. Shlomo, I'm going to assume that's a joke. Living through fulfillment, mortal purpose. Not entirely. In other words, during life, they fully fulfill their purpose. Is that what you're saying, Danny? So therefore, okay, so you're saying, and we necessarily didn't. I think you're touching on what we're going to get to in text 14, okay? And before we do that, it's important to understand what our choices are here in this world. You see, because we all have souls. We all will eventually have a legacy, a memory, no matter what, whether we have a good one or a bad one, a big one or a small one, we're all going to have something that's going to remember. The question is, what do we make our identity about? Okay, and that's the thing we'd like to discuss here. Okay, you see, many people in this world spend a lot of time on physical pursuits, and that is them basically saying, I'm here in this world, I got a body and a soul, as we mentioned. My body only lasts X amount of years, my soul lives on forever, but I am choosing to make my life all about my body. That word that we use all the time, lifetime, it's really a choice. It can be a lifetime of physical pursuits, a lifetime of the material, or a lifetime of the spiritual. You know, that same Talmud that we just mentioned that talks about righteous people at one end of the spectrum being alive after they die. You know what it says? It says that evil people, or Rishayim, a Rasha, even during their life, they are called dead. And this is the point we're making. That word we call life, that word we call lifetime, the physical, the span of life when our soul and body are married to each other, that's where we get the choice of what we make our life about. Should you make your life about the spiritual, which means more in tune with your soul? So then you are more alive. You're more alive in this world and you're more alive in the next world. And if you make your life more about the physical pursuits, then you're more dead in this world and certainly after you pass on from this world. So all of those physical things, I think many of you got my mailer with a sock, right? Which you cannot take with you. Those things die with you. And so therefore, even your legacy only lives on in this world. It doesn't really continue on. Your soul certainly continues on, right? Now, of course, every one of us finds ourselves somewhere along the spectrum. And that's what we're going to talk about. But let's go back to the tzaddik for a second. When someone makes their life about their spiritual identity, in other words, even while they're in this world, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, sitting in front of these people, he wasn't just saying, I'm not scared of what's coming because there's another world after my soul lives on. He was saying, right now, you think you're threatening me? This body that you see is so unimportant in my life. My life is really all about my soul that you cannot really kill me. This choice that we're talking about here, I know for a fact that a few people here in the audience read The Choice by Dr. Edith Eger, right? Raise your hand if you did. I'm just trying to get an idea here. The Choice by Edith Eger, a Holocaust survivor. One of the things that she shares is that while she was in the concentration camps, she lived by something that her mom told her, which was nobody can take away anything that you place in your mind. That's the idea that we're saying here. When we walk around this world, we can either walk around and be all about the physical, which a lot of people are, by the way. It takes nothing more than looking around the world. Look at the people living in Manhattan and Los Angeles and trying to live it up physically as much as they can. They got a big mansion and all sorts of stuff. They're trying to live their best physical life, but yet they are living dead. Why? Because all they're doing is making their life more about the physical. If we can make our lives, if we can make our lives more about the spiritual, then we can never die. And that's the point that's being mentioned. Ron, can you read for us, please, text 14? This is about a tzaddik and how why a tzaddik never dies. Go ahead.
The life of the tzaddik, righteous person, is not corporeal, but spiritual, consisting of faith, reverence, and love of God. This reality is reflected in the following passages. Of faith, it is stated, the tzaddik lives by his faith in Habakkuk 2:4. Of reverence, it is stated, reverence of God produces life. And that's Proverbs 19:23. Of love, it is stated, also in Proverbs, he who pursues charity and kindness will find life, and kindness is rooted in love.
Every single one of us, thank you, Ron, is given the same amount of years. Well, not the same amount of years, but we're given the same, let's call it a span of years in our lifetime, in which we get to accomplish whatever we would like, and we get to choose what we focus on. Is this starting to remind you of a passage from the Torah where Hashem tells us, choose life and don't choose death? That's how we're going to end the lesson, with that command. A tzaddik who makes his life, and he brings 3 verses, this is the Alter Rebbe Tanya, bringing 3 verses to show what a true tzaddik is. Now, we're not saying that every person that you think is a tzaddik, but assuming someone is a tzaddik, which means that what does their life constitute? Their life is about faith, their life is about life, their life is about love and kindness to other human beings, right? Faith in God, reverence, love and reverence to God, love for their fellow human beings, good deeds to their fellow human beings, etc. If that's what they're about, if that's what they make their entire life about, then they essentially are immortal. Because all that happens on that particular fateful day when their body passes on from this world is that they can no longer do it in a physical manner. But they were all about the spiritual anyways, so they haven't died. And this is something, my friends, that even though we're talking about this and it seems like a very lofty idea, this is something we can all really, really get to if we really put our minds to it, even if just a little bit more. One of my favorite bands is the 8th Day Band, 2 California boys, Bensi and Shmuley Marcus. And they have a great song on this topic. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
Why wait to celebrate? Bright lights in city streets.
8th Day is a popular Hasidic rock band.
Why wait to celebrate?
One of their hits was inspired by a powerful episode in the life of the second leader of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Dovber of Mezerich.
A student goes to visit a sage, and the sage has nothing in his house. And he says, where's your couches? Where's your chandelier? And he says back to the student, where's all your stuff? You just have a suitcase. And the student responds, but I'm just passing through. And that's when the sage says, aha, I'm just like you. I'm also just passing through.
To his student's assertion, Rabbi Dovber responded with a transformative insight.
That's when he said, I'm just like you. I'm just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me.
This world is temporary, where people spend most of their life collecting stuff. And the sage tells them, I'm actually just like you. I also collect stuff. It's just not that type of stuff, not leather couches and chandeliers. I collect treasures of another kind. You know, he stays focused on that higher goal.
Rabbi Dovber taught his students that this world's glitter is a distraction that expires when the journey of corporeality chugs to an abrupt end. Better to invest in treasures of a kind that will benefit the soul in its eternal destination.
I'm just like you. just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. And my heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. A palace for you and me.
How powerful of an approach is that? Where we recognize that every single moment in our lives is a choice, what we're going to make about it. And I think that's what the Torah wants us to do every single day of our lives. Esther Necha, if I can ask you to read the concluding text, the last text, text 15 on page 20, which is the quote from Deuteronomy, where the Torah tells us to choose life, but with a very powerful spin. Go ahead.
Behold, I have set before you today life and goodness and death and evil. Choose life. The term life in this verse does not refer to corporeal life, nor does death refer to the result of the soul's departure. For which simpleton needs to be instructed to choose to live? Rather, each creation, while alive and fully existent, contains both life and death. The physicality of the object is intrinsically lifeless. It is in a constant state of decline and deterioration. We observe this decline in every physical object as well as in ourselves. Our physical capacities and powers weaken with time. By contrast, the spiritual and divine within each thing is alive, eternal, and not subject to destruction or deterioration, God forbid.
Thank you. And I think now we have at least one resolution to thanatophobia, which means if death scares you, first of all, think about the real you, which we spent the first half of tonight's lesson speaking about. The real you is the soul. The real you is immortal. The real you precedes life, as we like to call it, and succeeds life. But then, more importantly, start to live more eternal. Start to live more of a soul-filled life, and then you will be more eternal. Because then death is
Lesson
not really
1.
death. I'm sorry. Because then death is not really death. Death is really just the next phase of living life. Because your life was never really about your physical body. And I think that's a very powerful takeaway from today's lesson. However, I will encourage you on page 21 to record one point from today's lesson that resonates with you personally. And perhaps, I know this is a bold request, identify an adjustment that you can introduce to your life for the sake of living more alive, more in tune with your soul. While you think about that, we'll play this recap video.
Lesson 1. Demystifying death. 1. The awareness of our mortality and the resulting natural fear of death influence many elements of our psyche, behavior, and life choices. Our perspective on death influences multiple areas of our lives. 2. The neshama, human soul, the true essence of the human being, is eternal. It precedes the body and continues to exist after the body is gone. While still in heaven, it does not desire to descend into a body. And when the time of death arrives, it resumes its native spiritual state. 3. The fact that the briefest spiritual experience of the next world is more pleasurable than all of this world does not diminish the reality that even a brief stay in this world is more important than all of the next. Therefore, Jewish law gives precedence to preserving life over nearly every mitzvah. 4. This perspective allows us to appreciate and value life without fear of death. 5. While our corporeal needs and endeavors die with the body, our soul-focused aspirations and actions live on eternally. Thus, when we live and identify with eternal values, our current life continues even after the body's demise.
Thank you for joining us for lesson 1 of Journey of the Soul. This evening's lesson was titled Demystifying Death. And I hope you will join us next week at 7:30, same time, same Zoom, for the second lesson, which is titled Taking Leave. The idea is that now that we have a proper appreciation for what life is, life and death, right? Who the true I is, what our real life is all about, and therefore what happens at death. Now we're going to dive into that moment that we like to call death and understand what's going on. We'll talk about on a philosophical level what goes on when a person passes away, how the soul leaves the body, what is left in this world, what is not. And then perhaps most popular about next week's lesson is we're going to talk about the nature of the soul's connection with its loved ones and the life that it has left behind. In other words, once it leaves this world, what's next? JLI always asks us that we mention this. You can always go online and continue learning at myjli.com/soul. There are interesting videos. There's at the back of your textbook, at the back of your lesson, there are additional readings if you'd like to read more about that, etc. But for now, we are going to say good night. Hold on. Let me just bring everybody back up. How do we do this? Here we go. Have a good night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.
Night,
Good to see
Rabbi.
you all.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Laila
Good night.
Look out for my
Laila Tov.